Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We are streaming live today, not from the SSP headquarters, but from the comfort of our homes. We are waiting to see what's going to happen later on today with a possible storm that we will have here in the Northeast. But we are cozy and happy to be here together again on this beautiful Saturday of February, our second Saturday of February 2025. We say this because we like to mark the time, right? We go through the struggles and the difficulties that we have, but we find a way to come together and to deliver a message, true to our form at the SSB. But we hope that we will be following us during this moment. And if later you're watching, you can also remember back, that the moments that we go through winter, through spring, whatever that may be. But as we were saying, true to our form, we also would like to read a passage of the book Happy Life and then say a prayer before we pass the word to our speaker tonight or this afternoon into this evening. The message from the book Happy Life by Joanna de Angelis through the hands of the medium DeMelo Franco is the following. From time to time, accompany a coffin to deepen your reflections on the biological phenomenon of life and death, observing how it occurs with others. You will wake up to what will inevitably happen to you. Eternity is of the spirit, while the experience of the body is transitory and brief. At this moment, you will have the sensation that all is well and will last. But for how long? And what guarantee do you have concerning the length of time allotted to you? Thus, live well. But meanwhile, do not discard the possibility of your return, which is, in fact, the most certain of all events. This way, let us take this moment to thank our dear Creator for this beautiful opportunity, for being together, perhaps not physically, but through our thoughts, through our hearts, and let us express this moment of gratitude towards one another for having the opportunity to work, to serve, to listen, and to change the environment within. Hopefully, to also be able to change the environment of others, our brothers and sisters who may be in need of help, guidance, protection. May this moment of light be with everyone who is following us in both realms of life. And may you, dear Lord, also guide the heart and mind of our dear friend Kirsten, who will be presenting to us tonight a beautiful talk, a beautiful message regarding integrity. This way, let us thank one another, our Master Jesus, our dear Creator, for all that we have, all that we are, in this moment ahead of us. And so be it. And tonight, well, I always keep forgetting because the time it starts at 5, and then here on the East Coast, and we're going to the evenings. We say evening, afternoon, but it doesn't really matter, right? It is this moment of guidance that we receive that we propose towards one another. Kirsten will be talking about conscientiousness and integrity. Another chapter of the book, Health and Conscientiousness, right, Kirsten? That you have been working so hard on this book towards the end now. But we before I pass the word, I would urge you to ask everyone to get your copy, read, because this book, these teachings of Joanna de Angelis are so liberating. Or with no further ado, Kirsten, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you find yourselves in any time zone or whenever you're watching this video. Perhaps it's, at a later time, maybe not during our live. So, yes, another chapter in this amazing book, Conscientiousness and Integrity, chapter 17 of the second part. Well, we heard this joke recently, not as much as a joke, it's just really interesting tale There was a bride and a groom who went to their wedding rehearsal at their parish, their church. And as they're rolling through all the usuals and doing all their bits that you do, and as the bride to be is off doing some things, the groom quietly goes over to the priest and hands him, a folded up $100 bill, and he says to the priest, "Listen, when we're doing the vows, can you leave out the, honor this and honor that until death do us part," and all that stuff. He said, just, say something else. So the priest nods his head, takes the money, and the rest of the day goes on. The following day comes, the wedding day is here, the ceremony starts, and they get to the bit where they're doing their vows. And as the priest begins to say the vows, he says, "And you promise to honor your wife and honor her all the days of your life." And the groom, he quietly and starts to kind of like shake nervously because he's wondering what happened. And he says, "Yes." And then he leans into the priest and says, "Father, I thought we had a deal." And then the priest looks at him and says, "Yeah, but your wife made a better one with me." Something for us to think about when we talk about integrity and what we get involved with when we talk about integrity, and how important living with integrity is in the smallest areas in our lives and areas of our lives where we may think no one else is looking, there are no cameras, no one can see into my home except for perhaps yourself with your own private cameras, perhaps. We don't often necessarily shine a light in those areas, but today's talk hopefully will shine a big light in those areas for us to not only look at our homes and our small social settings, but also most importantly within ourselves. And Joanna takes us down this oh so important road. And if you can remember, the previous chapter, chapter 16, talked about responsibility. And this chapter just builds on to that idea, how important it is to have integrity in our lives. So with that being said, integrity and our understanding of what it is, it's not only just being honest and doing the right thing. It's being honest, doing the right thing, living a congruent lifestyle, but doing so even when no one is looking, even when no one sees you, even when there's no, nowadays everything's on social media. Everything is, people are taking videos and posting them, and they say, nowadays everything lives forever. In the olden days, in the pre-social media, before the year 2000, my gosh, when social media did not exist as it does today, you could maybe get away with things. Nowadays, no, even more so, not nowadays. And integrity, which we will define here in a second, I wanted to share another actual true story we heard recently from a speaker. And he said that when he was about 8 or 9 years old, his family had a farm, and it was one of the ways they would make some extra money. And he was a rather large family, and each child had their own chore to do. So when he reached the age of 9, his mother and father came to him and said, "Look, your job this year is to plant the crop of corn." And so, of course, as any typical 9-year-old would do, he rolled his eyes, but he knew better, and he, of course, did what his parents asked him to do. So and his mother showed him how to, as best he could, to plant the corn. They have to be a certain amount of inches apart, and she wanted 50 rows. And he thought, oh my goodness, 50 rows. But he said, "Okay, Mom, I'll do it." So his mother handed him everything he needed, and he went off into the distance where their farm was, and he started planting. He said he planted the first few rows. He did it but then he said, "I really realized that this was such a waste of time, and I really didn't want to do this. And who said I have to plant it in this way anyway? Besides, my parents just told me to plant the seed. So I'm going to plant the seeds. So he decided to take all of the rest of the seeds, plant them all in one big pile, cover that with soil, and then just like spread it out. And he did that for about a little bit. And then eventually he felt pretty good and was done. So he went back home, went on with his life. Months and months and months and months later, the probably like the end of the summer, closer to the fall, as corn does, at least here in the East Coast, that's when it tends to grow. His father calls to him and says, "Son, come here. Let's go take a walk and let's go look at some of our crops." So he says, "I think nothing of it. I happily go with my father and a nice walk." Because I did, at the time he was washing the dishes, so he sat down the dishes and he went for a walk with his father. As they're walking, his father says, "Let's walk over to the cornfield." And so they're walking, and all of a sudden, as they get closer to the cornfield, all you see is this huge, huge pile of corn almost up to the sky. And his father says, "Son, what's that?" And he said his heart sank in his stomach. And he thought of, well, Jack and the Beanstalk, that's what came to mind. Maybe this is just how corn grew. And he said that day his father taught him about integrity and how important it was to live with integrity. Something that seemed so small, or maybe not so small. Because sometimes in the moment when we are doing a thing, it might seem small and insignificant, but later, when it's harvest time and you see the mess, that's usually when you go, "Oh man, probably shouldn't have done that way." And so we think about and reflect on our understanding of what integrity is. And there's multiple different definitions of what integrity is. But for this purpose, we're going to be talking about it today in a fundamental and a virtuous way, characterized by adhering to ethical and moral principles. And it could be defined as keeping promises, taking responsibility for one's actions, being honest in all transactions, treating others with respect, following the rules, etc., etc. And you can see the examples here: keeping promises, honoring confidentiality, taking responsibility, treating others with respect, admitting mistakes, doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. That is a biggie, because it's easy to do the right thing when no one is watching, right? So what will be the opposite of integrity? Hypocrisy, one might say. Hypocrisy would be the opposite of integrity, not living according to the values we say we believe in. Hypocrisy is saying one thing and it's opposite to our beliefs. Or we say we believe one thing and we go home and live differently. Now, food for thought: is hypocrisy the same as falling short? What do I mean by that? Is hypocrisy the same as not living up to our potential? What do you all think? Is it the same thing? And feel free to drop a comment, to drop your feedback on what you think could be the answer. I want us to think about that a little bit as we go on. But a hypocrite is a person who puts on a false appearance of virtue, a person who acts in contradiction to his or her stated beliefs. So having integrity would be the opposite of that. It is living in our truth, living out what we believe, despite the if there's someone in front of us or not. And there's another saying that we are who we really are is who we are when no one else is around. because sometimes that is when we are most comfortable. Even when we wear a mask, when we're by ourselves alone. So again, something for us to keep in mind. And also, another question I want us to think about. Do you want to be a person of integrity? Is that important to you? I'll ask another question. Is being a person of integrity important for you, for your children? Is it important to you that your children are children with integrity? Is it? Or do you think, well, it's more important to me that my children are successful. It's more important to me that my children is A or B or C or D. But what if they lack integrity? Again, just a food for thought. And there's this famous investor, Warren Buffett, who, if you're not familiar with who he is, he's estimated to be worth around over $100 billion, including all of his investments and whatnot. And he's really an interesting character to observe. And this talk isn't meant to go, into depth about Warren Buffett here, but it is interesting that they say that Warren Buffett still lives in the same house that he purchased when he was in his early 30s. And I believe he's anywhere between 70s and 80s, or a little bit older than that, give or take. And that he still has a flip phone. And these are just the ways in which he likes to live. These are things that he's comfortable with. But he gave a talk. He gave a brief talk at a local college, and he was talking about integrity, and he wanted to impart this knowledge. And one of the quotes from that he's famous sort of for knowing, is that he's for saying, look for 3 things in a person: intelligence, energy, and integrity. If they don't have the last one, don't even bother with the first 2. And in some ways, there are some quotes from this particular talk he gives where he says, don't even bother with the first 2, because if they don't have the third, they're extremely dangerous people. Because imagine having intelligence and energy, but no morality, no moral compass. And we need not look far in history to see people of that caliber. So, again, I ask the question, do you wish to be a person of integrity, and to have integrity, to practice integrity? And the word integrity, coming from the Latin word that gives us the word integer, meaning 1, or also meaning integrity is meaning whole. Because integrity is about being whole. It's about wholeness. It's about being congruent. And congruency is just a fancy word to say that what I say with my mouth, I also believe in my heart. That those 2 things, they match up. And when they don't match up, I'm not living my best and happiest life. No one can be happy that way, at least not really. And Joanna in this chapter begins out and reminding us that individuals who seek integrity, the state of complete moral balance, have acquired self-awareness, have achieved the psychological maturity resulting from the correct observance of the laws of life. To remind us that life is composed of these successive stages of the evolutionary process by which the spirit advances from one experience to the next, molding the inner pure spirit that sleeps in latency, the manifestation of divine consciousness, its origin, its causality. So we go through many stages of life, advancing and moving forward, and every choice that we make molds who we are. But if you have managed to be a person who seeks integrity, you are already on the road for moral self-awareness, or for self-awareness in general. and moral balance. She says, on their journey, individuals normally get used to the amenities of the flesh, either because of still prevailing animal atavisms or because of self-indulgence, without realizing their urgent need for growth. In other words, do we get used to living on this physical plane and all the pleasures that come with it? As she politely says, the amenities of the flesh. Can we identify that in ourselves at all? And she reminds us every instance of development breaks such bonds, providing liberation and sometimes causing pain. This is really interesting. So she talks about getting used to the amenities of the flesh. We get used to the ease and the comfort and all the good things there is on this planet Earth. But she says, as we begin to develop, evolve, and those chains of materialism get cut, they free us, but not without some pain. That's really interesting because oftentimes people think, well, when I become spiritually advanced, I become pain-free. And that's not always true. Growing, there's a reason why they call in children in physical development, there's actual growing pains. Children, as they grow, have something on their bones called growth plates, and they begin to grow and expand. And it's quite common for children as they're growing at certain stages, at all stages in their development, that actually have pain. Some have more pain than others. So the same is mimicked, is mirrored in our spiritual life. Why would it be any different? Why would it be any different? Pain is an indicator that there's something going on. And oftentimes, when you're not living a life with integrity, you live a life of dis-ease. When we're not living a life with integrity, many times we will live a life in dis-ease, disease. Many diseases can be caused, we know, by our own spiritual, moral, emotional imbalance. In the last decade or so, there's this new science, PNI, psychoneuroimmunology, that connects the hormones that are released from your body, your emotions, and how it affects your immune system. Science is already saying, hey, this stuff is true. We are causing our own imbalances. And again, we might not think that much of it. We might think, well, a lot of these things are small, minuscule, no one's noticing it. No one will even care. It's so small. But there is someone that's always seeing it, who always knows. Actually, there's two. My mistake. Who will always know what you're doing. Your own conscience and God. All the time. Except God in his graciousness always loves, forgives. But we are the ones who tend to not forgive ourselves, be harsh with ourselves. If not right away, later, we can often get stuck in a rut because we feel so bad for things past that we've done. In fact, there is this story that Joel Osteen tells of his father, who became pretty well-to-do and became a famous pastor in his own right in his time, but took many years to build up to that. And Joel Osteen tells a story of his father when he was young. When he was young, his father told him of a story when he was young, when his father was in his 20s or 30s. He had 2 suits made, and he had to have it made in a different city. But then he had placed the order and they had made the suits. He forgot to pick them up, and he consequently never paid for them. So, and he said he completely forgets about these 2 suits. They were rather, expensive, and goes about his life. And 20, 30 years later, he's passing by this particular city, and then he just remembers, oh my goodness, I ordered these 2 suits and I never paid for them. My gosh. So he doesn't quite remember, the exact address, but he drives to around about the area. He finds the place. The place is closed. And in its place was a new thing. He asked the local business owners, hey, what happened to the business? They let him know the business closed down many, many years ago. But if you're interested, the children are now adults of the original owners who have passed away, and they actually own another place down the street. He proceeds to find these children that are now adults, and Joel Osteen's father finds them and says, look, 30 years ago, I ordered these suits, and I'm so sorry, I can't let this go. Please, I want to just pay for, it was like $300. So he goes to write him a check, and the guy says, listen, I really appreciate you saying that, but my parents have been dead for a long time, and their business went out, their business fell apart 20 years ago. And he said to the gentleman, I really appreciate your grace, but I can't move forward unless I pay this. So he paid it. And Joel Osteen was attributing that to the integrity that his father had, and the subsequent life that he lived, a life of simplicity, yet with a lot of respect from others who knew he lived a life of integrity. He could have very well never paid that guy. $300 for him at that time was nothing. But that wasn't the point. The point was he owed a debt. And he felt a strong desire to fill that. And as I go back to the text, when Joanna talks here about how we can become distracted by these amenities of the flesh, we get used to, we become complacent. And I found a quote that really kind of matched this text from this book, The Way of Integrity, by Dr. Martha Beck. And she says, when we aren't distracted by culture, we move directly toward fulfilling our innate longing. When we're craving things we've been taught to want, we lose track of our inner motivations entirely and may spend a lifetime pursuing rewards that never make us feel truly fulfilled. In other words, as Joanna put it, when we get used to the amenities of the flesh because of our still prevailing animal atavisms, without realizing our urgent need for growth, we can put off our advancement. And that advancement is our fulfillment, is leading a virtuous life. But, Joanna says, but seeking to escape pain, individuals usually turn to pleasure as a psychodynamic of evasion. But seeking to escape pain, individuals usually turn to pleasure as a psychodynamic of evasion, and they begin to depend on it. depend on it, thus programming inevitable future suffering. Joanna doesn't mess around with her words. And she reminds us, not only in this book, but in another book of hers that was psychographed through the medium Givaldo Franco, entitled Existential Conflicts. In the first chapter, she titles it, I believe it's Psychological Escape, and she talks about how there is this level where in our minds, we like to sort of detach a little bit from what's going on around us, for our mind to just kind of take a break. And that's okay. But when we get to the degree where we're not only escaping in our mind to such a degree, but in our actions, to distract us completely, it becomes this psychodynamic of evasion that she refers to, returning to pleasure. And that becomes our coping mechanism. Think about that. When we become addicted, and you have to think about how the human brain works when it comes to pleasure. When we get addicted to anything, food, drugs, any array of behaviors, when we become addicted, our brain, it creates this routine. Let's call it a routine just to make things easier. And we get used to that routine. And we have to have that routine because the feedback mechanism is that if I do this, it brings joy. And when I do this, it brings joy. And it becomes a programming that Joanna says here, a programming in our brain. And it programs us for the inevitable future suffering. Instead, we ought to lean into what's causing us pain. We seek so much to escape from it. And we live in this society, and we've always lived in this kind of society. Folks, this is not new. If people might think, oh, it's this generation. Oh, it's just this last 100 years. No, it is not. It is not. People have been abusing things, whether it's sex, money, gambling. Think of all those things. Those things have always existed since civilizations have existed. If you look back in history, you will find it. They see it in the times of the Romans, of the Egyptians, of the Mayans. Whatever civilization has existed, there has been an attempt to escape pain by many different means. When instead, there should be a paradigm shift. We should be leaning into our pain and asking that pain, what does it want to teach us? What are you here to teach me? What do I need to learn? That is the question. And Joanna goes on to say, only awareness about life's overall goals fosters a correct vision for behavior that prepares one for the next step in a future reincarnation. Shockingly, I heard something. I saw this preview. Sometimes we like to watch, we don't have social media anymore. Sometimes we'll watch YouTube, and YouTube has this thing called Shorts. It's kind of like what TikTok's version, but it's like under a minute or two. And you're watching this short of this pretty well-known TV show. I'll just go ahead and say it. It was Kim Kardashian's mother. It was the Kardashian Show, which I've never actually watched, but I've seen these snippets, and it was really interesting because the mother of Kim Kardashian, whose name is absolutely escaping me at this moment, she's probably in her 60s now, late 60s, and she in this short clip, she says, the only way I can keep myself from being depressed and to have fulfillment in my life is to make new goals. I found that very telling, very interesting. After, we never really know what goes on in the lives of people. And TV is known for showing false things. But for the sake of conversation, it's interesting for us to think about that other people may be aware that having goals, when she says fosters a correct vision, it gives us a purpose. It helps us to focus. Okay, what are my goals? What am I living for? What am I trying to achieve? This is important at any stage of our lives, at any and every stage of our lives. And not just now, because we often don't think about what we're doing today is also preparing us for any future lives we might have. But Joanna continues, she says, this results in the phenomenon that show up in the area of behavior. One's tendencies, inclinations, aspirations, temperament. Now remember what she said here. All this behavior shows up in our actions. We need only look at our tendencies, what we're hoping for, what we lean towards. There's always that famous phrase, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. Or the other phrase, as my mother sometimes would say growing up, flocks of a feather fly together. Meaning, be mindful. It's not always about who your friends are, but who we are. Yes, other people, they influence us. Joanna reminds us all the time. She reminds us in several different of her books. In Happy Life, the little book many are familiar with that Givaldo psychographed. And she says, people influence us much more than what we realize. The Spirit's book also talks about that. But really, the intent is for us to focus on our own inner world, our own tendencies, inclinations, aspirations, and our temperaments. And really, she gives us this advice and this reminder that integrity arises from disciplining negative tendencies and superficial aspirations for the sake of deep values and full conscientiousness of life's objective and meaning. How many times or at all have any of you ever experienced this where you were at a store or you were out somewhere and you were having an interaction with someone and perhaps someone did something that was rude, something that was really out of pocket, as they say, or just really just annoying perhaps. And you could have easily reacted. You could have easily said, hey, watch yourself. Or you could have just reacted in a as equally as they did to you, maybe in a harsh way. But you decide, you know what? I'm just gonna turn the other cheek. Maybe this person had a bad day. And then later that day, when you go to the center or your church, and you see the guest pastor, and it happens to be that very person who did that thing to you, and you think, oh my goodness, imagine if I had yelled at them. Or maybe you go into work and you get a new boss that day, and that happens to be your new boss. Some of us, on some degree, in some way, shape, or form, has experienced something similar to that. We never know who we're dealing with in life, and we never know the struggles that other people have. So it's always beneficial for us to be kind and give grace to others and to maintain our integrity, even when it's something super small, even when, and especially when we don't feel like doing it. And there have even been times where you may have come across an instance where maybe you found $500 on the road, and it just so happened that the person's ID was with the envelope, and really you really want to keep that money because you can think of all the nice purses you could buy with that $500, or all the nice perfume, or this or that, or whatever it is that you like, go on a trip somewhere, but the right thing, and you bring it to that person's address. You say, here you go. Because that's the right thing to do. Even when it's hard and nobody would have really known that you took that $500 because you found it. But being a person of integrity, we know in our heart of hearts who we are and what we do. Joanna goes on to say, if you wish to have the integrity of an individual of the good, start working on minor responsibilities and modest achievements. If you wish to have the integrity of an individual of the good, work on minor responsibilities and modest achievements. It's very easy in a situation that's very visible and big to do the right thing, because our ego can be stroked because others are looking at us and we know that doing this is the right thing. But it's the everyday, mundane, minor, modest things that aren't really looked at or recognized. And let's be honest, to be a person of integrity, it's not something that is necessary. It's not cherished. It's not valued necessarily in our society. It's not what everyone necessarily turns on the TV to watch. We can see that by TV ratings, podcast ratings, what people are listening to. So we have to recognize that no, it's not always fun to be a person of integrity, but it's the right thing to do. And it leads us to our fulfillment. It leads us to our joy. It leads us to be a person of our word, to be a person of valor, to be a person that I will be proud for my child to look at and say, that's my mom, or that's my dad. Or to look at our own mother and father and have them look at our lives and say, I know my mom is proud of me, or I know my dad is proud of me. Are we living those lives? And here's where she shares what I just shared. It's too easy to become a giant in large and impressive accomplishments. Real winners, however, become giants in the little things, ennobling themselves in insignificant tasks. And then you become the person that other people want to rely on. And it will be those little things. When you're at work and you have little instances where you can kind of lie a little bit. No one really knows, but maybe your coworker kind of knows, like you each go out to lunch and your manager's pretty lenient and your coworker says, oh, well, let's stay another 20, 30 minutes. The boss doesn't care. And you go, well, I can't do that. That our lunch is 1 hour. Let's just go. If we can chit chat after work. And your coworker's like, boss doesn't care. Yeah, but I care. And your coworker could probably say to you, oh, you're such a insert phrase here, insert adjective here. But you yourself, you feel good because you know you could sleep at night. That is something small. And truthfully, over time, that coworker will know and look at you as a reliable human being. And not only that, people will speak of you. And whether we realize it or not, there are always people watching us. Always, always, always. For the good or the bad. So let us think about becoming giants in the little things of our lives, having integrity in the most insignificant of tasks. And she says, individuals of integrity are true to their duty and never desert it. They are aware of its edifying power, and consequently, they are responsible, discreet, and hardworking. I cannot help, when we were studying this, to think of Joanna de Cusa, or Joanna, the wife of Cusa in the Bible, or Chusa, Cusa, however you pronounce it. It's probably also one of my favorite stories in the book Boa Nova, which is in English. It's called The Good News. It's one of the last few chapters of the book. And the chapter is called Joanna, the wife of Cusa. And it's so beautiful. And I always think of her. And we know it is said that Joanna, the wife of Cusa, it was one of the reincarnations of Joanna de Angelis. And in a biblical sense, we know that it is known, that she existed at that time, as in the Bible. But of course, in Boa Nova, they give a little bit more information. And just for context purposes, Joanna, the wife of Cusa, she became a follower of Jesus. Her husband was not. He was not only was he not a follower of Jesus, but he would mock her. He would just be so disrespectful. He didn't respect her, and he didn't, it made living with him extremely difficult. And she was really, really unhappy. She lived in a very unhappy marriage. And in Boa Nova, they tell us that Joanna goes to her husband, goes to Jesus, and it says to her, Jesus, I just can't live with him. Like, I'm just not, I'm not happy. This is just not where I want to be. My husband he doesn't follow you. He doesn't believe. And she really was genuine in everything that she was saying to Jesus. And she was unhappy and fully expecting Jesus to just kind of say to her, yes, Jesus, yes, Joanna, take up your cross and follow me. But that's not what he said to her. He said to her something quite shocking. And it speaks to what Joanna shares right here on the slide, of individuals of integrity are true to their duty and never desert it. And because Jesus says to her, Joanna, there's only one God who is our Father, and there's only one faith for our relationship with his love. He goes on, and he says, the bloodless fight of spiritual redemption has begun between the sincere disciple of the gospel and the age-old errors of the world. Thank the Father that he has judged you worthy of the good work from here on. And Jesus says to Joanna of Cusa, does your spouse not understand your sensitive soul? He will someday. Is he imprudent and indifferent? Love him just the same. You would not be bound to him if there were no just reason. And he goes on and on to say lots of other things. And she says, "Thank you, Master. That's so comforting to me. But don't you think I should impose my way of your teachings?" And he gently says to her, "Why does God not impose his truth and his love on the tyrants of the earth? Why does he not strike down with lightning the merciless that spreads misery? Heavenly wisdom does not destroy the passion, it transforms them. The one who has sowed the world with corpses sometimes awakens to God through a single tear. The Father does not impose reform on his children. He enlightens them at just the right time." So, and he goes on, and you can read more in the book. It's beautiful. But going back to Joanna DeAngelis' words, as a reminder, individuals of integrity are true to their duty and never desert it. And Joanna of Cusa did not desert her duty and her responsibility as a wife. Whenever individuals seek new sensations to please the ego, they have not yet acquired the conscientiousness of integrity. Many people will abandon their duties, their responsibilities, in search for a fun and free life. In the previous chapter, we gave the example of the story of Pinocchio, who gets lured to Pleasure Island by the misleading fox. And we learn through that book, it's sort of an allegory, of how humanity can be. We get disillusioned. We seek for new sensations to please our ego. And it does not bring us any joy, nor have we reached any height, or we have not reached, as Joanna says, the acquired conscientiousness of integrity. We lack that when we are still in that phase. And she finalizes and reminds us the triumph of human beings over themselves is difficult because it derives from living according to the good and order after the onset of subsequent action of lucid conscientiousness. So it is challenging. She does not say otherwise, but she reminds us that we have a standard to look at, to pull from, to look towards, to aspire to be. And that is here in this question and answer from the Spirit's Book 625. What is the most perfect standard that God has offered to humankind as a God and model? And he answers Jesus. And Joanna finalized. Jesus answered the wise instructors from the greater world, leaving us the epitome of conscientiousness and integrity. So we ask, do you want to be a person of integrity? Do I? Don't look out. Don't think about your neighbor. Don't think about, your ex. Don't think about that coworker that you really don't like, or your boss, or the government, or the guy down the street, or the owner of the pet shop. Focus the lens inward. That's the only thing we can change. Us. Ourselves. And here are just some ways that we can begin to incorporate by understanding what integrity means. Expressing gratitude when people help you. Valuing honesty and openness. when we are responsible and accountable for our actions, good and bad. It's very easy to be held accountable for all the good that we do. It's much more difficult to own up to our own imperfections. Respect yourself and others around you, no matter where you are. Be reliable and trustworthy. Help those in need, and be patient and flexible when unexpected obstacles show up. And lastly, one last quote from this very interesting book. Again, it's called The Way of Integrity. It's not a spiritist book, but nonetheless very interesting, by Martha Beck. She says this: it boils down to this: peace is your home. Integrity is the way to it. And everything you long for will meet you there. Peace is your home. Integrity is the way to it. So, folks, thank you all so much for sticking with us during this time and for listening to Joanna's words. And I'll pass the ball back over to Leo.
Try to unmute myself here. Great talk, Kirsten. And this is a beautiful and amazing topic, right? Integrity. Not easy, because as we are learning, as we are evolving, we are questioning more what is integrity for us. I love the questions that you brought at the beginning as well, right? Of course, we want to be a person of integrity, right? Of course, we at our level, we expect from ourselves some integrity, right? If not fully, because we know that others are following us, our steps, right? For us who are parents, for us who are responsible for anything or for anybody, we want to be of integrity, right? Because we know that if those who follow us, they're not doing the same, guess what? We will suffer, right? And I think it goes back to that principle of how can I be happy when others are not happy, right? So when we see Joanna DeAngeli saying that we will live a life of disease, right? Guess what? We don't want it. We don't want it for those who are around us, or for anybody, for all that matter. But great talk, great reminder. We do have I do have another comment here, but I'll pass the word first to doors, not the word, but I will share the questions that we have from those who are following us right now. Actually, many of them, many individuals here. We have our dear friend. I cannot show for some reason. I do not. Thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. Wendell brings the first question. Some people feel uncomfortable if their external persona does not match who they truly are when alone, while others go through life comfortably maintaining this lie. Why do we see such a discrepancy?
Yeah, that is a great question, and really deep. You know, as we always share, we are such complex individuals. And it's very easy for us to look at another individual who, purports that, that they are acknowledging that they live this dichotomous lifestyle or this incongruent lifestyle where they say one thing, they have this external persona, but when they go home, they're a different person. And there's a lot to be said about understanding what the persona is and wanting to go home and just decompress. There are many layers to this, because sometimes we are outgoing, but when we're at home, we want to just be quiet because maybe we've spent all our energy. A lot of complexities, but without being able to go into any of the complexity of it, why does it seem like some people are quote unquote happy living that way or are comfortable? Well, looks can be very deceiving. Living an incongruent life, that person is not fulfilled. It's not possible to feel fulfilled. Not entirely. not in the ways in which that we are fully meant to. But again, it's easy as an outsider to make that observation and believe. And maybe in that person's mind, maybe for a while they can lie to themselves for a long period of time, because we can live in sort of like a loop in this disillusion for quite some time. But there is an expiration date on that. We all, in this life or in the next, will need to, and because the law of progress, how it works, we will reach that point where we get tired, we want something else, we want to live in and live up to who we really are meant to be, which is living with integrity and living our truths and being truthful with who we are. Because when you live with integrity, and I heard this saying that if you always lie, it gets easier to keep lying. And if you always tell the truth, it's easier to always keep telling the truth. And also, the more you lie, you better have a really good memory to remember all those lies. So just something to think about.
Thank you, Kirsten. Next question from Chris. Great talk, Kirsten. The world today needs a huge reminder of integrity because there seems to be a lack of it today. The worst part is there are people who seem to admire and praise people without integrity and reject the people who are full of integrity. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me
You're
now?
back.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is actually a really interesting comment, and very appropriate for, the time we live in. I think it would be appropriate for any time in history, because there's always people, from different backgrounds. There's always that, some people like this one person, and yet this other side of society can look at that same person or people and not like them. But I was reading this research about culture and integrity. And they did this research cross cultures and found that, in the Western culture, we may look at, for instance, we may look at an individual that gives back to the poor, or that uses money that they receive from the public to give back to the poor, and goes through channels that aren't right. And in Western societies, obviously those things, when it's against the law, it's against the law. And I'm not getting into politics here, folks. This is not a place to talk about that. I'm simply relating what I was reading in this particular research. I think it was PubMed. But if you're curious, I could pull it up later and share it with whoever asks. And they found in other cultures, Eastern or otherwise, they looked at things where they looked at situations differently. So the point is not so much, the thing itself, but reevaluating how we're looking at things. And I'll bring up another example. Maybe this might be more tangible. I was recently watching a history documentary on an actress, not that big. And it turned out this small level actress actually had pretty famous family in Pennsylvania that were abolitionists. And when you think about abolitionists, so there was a famous thing that happened in many different places, but there was an abolitionist. She was white. Her and her husband owned a farm in Pennsylvania. I think it was called the Pownell Farm. And they ended up renting this little house to a slave that ran away from the South and came to the northern states where he's free. Okay? Now, there was a law that any slave that ran away had to be sent back. That was the law. That was the law. In whatever time period it was. I can't recall, 18, whatever it was, 17, 18, whatever, 100 it was. I don't remember. But at that time, that was the law. But this particular family that is known in the history books, if you look up history, Sarah Pownell, I'm saying it correctly, the abolitionist. She also was a Quaker. There was a huge group of Quakers that's well known in history to be abolitionists. And they also didn't believe in violence. But they would help these slaves that had ran away. So it poses into question, and I'm just putting it out there. It was against the law. But morally, was it not the right thing for her to help these slaves that ran away? That wanted to be in the northern states where they were allowed to be free, but I'm putting that out there for us to think about what we judge as right and wrong. And I will quote William Shakespeare. And he said, in one of his vast writings, he said, "There is neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so." That's all I'm going to say on that.
Kirsten, thank you for that. It's interesting because I would like to share a personal part of my life that going to business school, one of the things that I came across many times in terms of studying business in the world mainly, is that you come across situations, you come across cultures, you come across countries that to wash someone else's hand to, for example, win a contract, it's okay, right? That a kickback is okay for certain cultures, and it's something normal. Where here in the U.S., depending on, I'm not gonna say that we're a perfect society, but for the most part, it's not okay, right? We shouldn't do business with one another that way. We shouldn't get into a contract where you're getting a kickback, right? And I'm being awarded a contract on something that I have to do based on how much I can pay, but rather on how I will be effective with that. Again, I'm saying this because it is something that I also, it crossed my mind in many cases. Like, it would be really hard for one of a right mind to do business in a country, in a culture, in a setting that way, right? Because chances are you will be held accountable later on to continue with the same thing, to continue with the same behavior, right? And there's all of this to say because we had Chris ask this question, and again, I don't want to be political, I don't want to go into a tangent here, but as you were speaking earlier as well, my question on this, and it is based also on the teachings that we find in Luke chapter 16, and it starts at 16:10, and I pulled over here since I'm in front of the computer. That's how I can say the verse that starts by saying, "Whoever can be trusted with small things can also be trusted with big things." And you mentioned this earlier, right? So would integrity be a development of a moral that starts with the small things to get to the point where the bigger things then will act the same way, right? Since we see that, just as you mentioned, saying the truth, more often will lead you to say the truth thereafter as well, right? So with your studies, would you think that this would be the process of start with the small things, right? Because before we can conquer the bigger things, to be if I can say, a fully integral person, we ought to do the small things, deal with the small things, the small lies, the small white lies that we perhaps sometimes are triggered to say.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that part of scripture. That's so, um, I can't think of the words. It's so appropriate. And it was perfect. Thank you for adding that, Leo. That was great.
Thank you. So Paula asks, what factors contribute to someone not prioritizing self-growth? And then I would just wanted to add real quick here, Daniel, if we can bring the second part of her if this confuses, we can always go back, Kirsten. But she also says, thanks for these noble reminders. How to counter despair when a politician is elected who appears to lack integrity and a moral compass. Self growth in this one.
Okay, I'll start with the first one. So thank you, Paula, for your questions. And according to our readings and studying from Joanna and Spiritism in general, if to best answer what factors contribute to someone not prioritizing self-growth, often will be if a person has not created the habit of discipline and created this habit of wanting to prioritize their self-growth. So from a young age, some of the factors could have been, the nature versus nurture, how they grew up, what their family taught them, what they were exposed to. But again, nature versus nurture. Sometimes people are not exposed to it, and they bring this something inside of them that they desire to continuously look for growth. And it just, depends upon the person. And we each have our own journey of self-growth. Some come to it sooner, some come to it less. But I think the point is, and the question should always be, am I prioritizing my self-growth? And when I look at myself, how long did it take me to get here? And I'm only aware of this life. I don't know. Very, very small percentage of people can recall their past lives, thankfully. We're not meant to recall them. But if we think about how many centuries and hundreds of incarnations or reincarnations we've had where we did not prioritize self-growth, I always remind myself that whenever I get into thinking too highly of myself, I remind myself that I've only been this good this life that I can recall, and not even the full life, part of it. So what about the other parts, the other lifetimes I was not? So I was given grace. God was patient with me. Lord knows whatever mothers I've had in previous lifetimes and my current mother, the amount of grace and love that was bestowed on me. And we're taught, love thy neighbor. Treat others how you want to be treated. So if someone else is not coming or prioritizing their growth, that's on them. We ought not to be preoccupied with it. And that's, I think, part of the difficulty in our society is we become super focused on others and not enough on ourselves. Because when we truly live in our oneness, in our integrity, in our wholeness, and we just live and exude that, we become a living book, and others will see that around us and will see that light and be curious about it. And to answer the second question, is that it's a loaded question, but I will say this, similar to as I just said and what I shared earlier. It's very easy to judge someone, a public figure, or anyone that's in the public eye. And we can look at any celebrity in life that's ever existed, and we can put them, in a court of law, or we can put them on the stand and tear them to pieces because their life is out there. Everything's under scrutiny. And I say this as a Christian. I say this as a spiritist. I say this as a mother. Truly, first and foremost, I say this as a mother, that if someone were to look at my son, the way that we sometimes tear apart other people, and I think to myself, how would I want someone to see my son as I see him, as I love him, full of imperfections that he or she or my son or daughter may or may not have? How would I want them to be seen, or how would I want them to be treated? So with that being said, as spiritists, as followers of Jesus, we are called to be like him. So remember, there were people at Jesus' time that were absolutely ruthless and cruel and the worst of the worst. And when they came to Jesus, Jesus never turned anyone away. Never in the literature, anywhere, has he ever done that. He never did it to the prostitute. He never did it to any of the sinners, to those that came to him with multiple ailments. He never turned anyone away. When he went to eat in the house of the tax collectors, and there were prostitutes, quote unquote, there, or whatever they were called in that time, harlots, and that was unheard of. Unheard of. That was the most heinous crime you could do as a Jew, is to break bread with an unclean person. And Jesus did it. He did it with love in his heart and a desire to remind those around them that above the politics, above what was cool or what was the popular thing to do, Jesus didn't care about it. It's not about that. It's about refocusing. It's about having integrity all in ourselves, doing the right thing in our day-to-day lives. Again, Joanna says we get so caught up in the amenities of the flesh. And I see Leslie's question about authenticity and integrity are the same thing. They are very similar. Living authentically is living with integrity. Living an authentic life, being authentic to who you are, you're living a congruent life with what your head and heart say, they match. That's how we ought to live. It's just how we ought to live. And it's hard and it's difficult and it's not easy. But it's how we should live. Sorry if I talk too much.
No, thank you, Kirsten. I wanted just to acknowledge one of the things that Paula mentioned here, that, and I noticed myself, because I also, most of the time I'm following through YouTube as well, that there are ads being shown on the stream right now. We will figure it out, try to find out why it's happening. I already sent a message to Daniel and we were working on it. So just to acknowledge that, I know it's towards the end. I should have acknowledged this at the beginning, right after the right before the questions there. But in any case, I want to just go ahead and we're working on it and make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. The last question that I would like to bring here, I think this brings
Before
us
you
home.
go to that, Leo, can I just comment on something else Paula said here?
Sure.
She said, thanks for the reminder on self-focus as it goes along with the current bestseller, the let them theory. And I heard about this bestseller and did some quick reading on it. And I love the theory behind this book. I've not read it. I read about it. And I watched an interview of Jerry Seinfeld. It was a very quick interview. And the journalist was interviewing him and saying, Jerry, how old are you now? And he's like, I'm 70, 74. And she's like, man, you look fantastic. And really, he looks great. Jerry's not for his age. And she said, well, what's the trick? Is it Botox? Is it this? Is it that? Because he's like a millionaire. And he said, honestly, do you want to know my honest reason, what I honestly do? He said, I just don't care. And she's like, what are you talking about? He's like, I don't care. If people get mad at me, I don't care. If he said, I live my life the best way I know how. I live by my values. I love my family. Family is really important to me. And anyone who's ever followed his career, his family, his wife, his kids are extremely important to him, have always been. He's been a family guy, and he said, it's so easy to get so upset about the critics and upset about this project or that project or someone, and you can really go crazy. And he said, and it has to do with the let them theory. If someone wants to hate you, let them. Let them. If someone chooses to live their life another way, let them. We're losing our peace. For what? For what? For nothing. And I saw this when the famous soccer player, Vinicius, I don't remember his last name, there's this whole back and forth about him not winning some award. I think it was best player. And I saw a comment someone put online that went viral, and it was something like, because there were so many fans and outrage that he didn't win this, saying they were citing because he's black, that's why he didn't win, and he really is a phenomenal player. And there was this like joke that was put out there, like, oh, millions of like spectators are in uproar. Meanwhile, there's this picture of Vinicius on his beautiful yacht with this gorgeous model. He doesn't care. Here we are in an uproar. So we have to think about what we spend our mind on and what we give our mind to. Be happy. Life is so simple. Life is simple. We complicate things. Life is beautiful. Do the right thing. It's hard, but we'll be happy in the end. Sorry, Leo.
No, thank you. Thanks for the connection that you made, and as this idea of let them as well. It's really interesting because it connects with what Leslie mentioned, right? In terms of the authenticity, right? Not necessarily being authentic. It's that it says that we're going to be doing the right things, but at least we're authentic because we're trying our best, right? At the beginning, also you ask, is succeeding, not succeeding being somebody who doesn't care or not, being of an, integral person? Not necessarily. I mean, we're trying our best, right? So at the end, we're taking baby steps, right, to be this person that Joanna DeAngelo is bringing to us. And I'd like to just finalize, and after you make your comments, you can, I'll invite you to say the final prayer as well because of time. We would like to continue this on this matter, on this idea here, these teachings, but obviously we have to put into practice, right? Alba actually asked a question, and I would like just to share with everyone. And I think it also reminds us to bring it back to us, as you already mentioned, but I think it's good to highlight again. She says the following: thank you for highlighting Joanna's teachings about integrity. I'm wondering, for communities, societies that use dishonesty as an accepted norm, i.e. keeping appearances, at what point individuals will wake up?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alba, for watching, and thank you for sharing your question. We're always so happy and grateful when folks are tuning in and listening and take the time out to comment, because it also helps the algorithm and it gets the message out more. Having said that, to answer your question, yes, kind of similar to something I kind of shared earlier, but basically I'll say this: it reminds me, I believe something that Jesus said, that before societies change, man must change. Or rather, Jesus said, before kingdoms must change, man must change. Man meaning man, woman. People must change. Our hearts as individuals must change. So if we're looking for a society to change, we must change ourselves first. That's what it boils down to. We must change ourselves first. And if everyone took that mindset, we'd have a different society. So yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten. As I was mentioning, I would like to thank everyone for connecting with us and spending this time with us. And Kirsten, since you have been inspired to give this beautiful talk and bring this beautiful chapter to us, can we ask you to finalize and say the final prayer, please?
Yes, sure, it'd be my pleasure. Dear God, we thank you for this beautiful moment together in this virtual setting. We thank you of the blessing, the teachings brought through the hands, the medium Givaldo Franco, and his spirit guide, Joanna DeAngelis. We thank you for these uplifting ideas and ideals, these reminders on how to live our lives. May we take them into our hearts. May we plant seeds in our souls and live the best way possible. May we have courage to be and do the right thing, even when it's hard and we're scared. Dear God, we pray for our brothers and sisters across the globe, for all the children of God, for all of your creation. We pray for unity. We pray for peace. We pray, dear God, that you might touch the hearts and minds of all those on this planet, especially those leading countries and cities, towns. But even more importantly, dear God, we pray for families. We pray for the family units to be fortified, to be strengthened. We thank you, dear Jesus, for bringing us comfort in our hearts, always and forever. And so be it. Amen.